know most of us and we don't know her. Linda, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Councillor Parrish, Chair Parrish. I'm Lynn Kiernan. I'm the Area Councillor, Ward 1, Town of Caledon, and I'm looking forward to working with everyone. Thank you.
Welcome. Do we have any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none, can someone move approval of the agenda? Councillor Starr, all those in favor?
Just a minute, Councillor. We still have to say the electronic protocol. Plus,
sorry.
we received it's okay. I'll just say the electronic protocol, and then I'll guide you through the approval of the agenda. Okay, so I'm just going to provide a brief, very shortened protocol for electronic participation in this meeting. Recorded votes are not allowed at committee meetings. The committee chair or I will call for any objections. If you have an objection, please indicate your name and objection. If no objections are stated, the motion will be deemed to be approved. If you are participating electronically and are leaving the meeting, please send an email to council@plregional.ca to confirm that you are leaving the meeting and the reasons for the absence. If you left the meeting for any votes thereafter, you will be marked as absent. For committee members and staff only, please email the council@plregional.ca to request to speak. I shall now commence the meeting with the roll call. Councillor Carlson.
I'm here, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Fortini.
Here, present.
Thank you. Chair Yanika. I don't see him. Oh, he just joined the meeting. Chair Yanika. I'll come back to him. Councillor Innes.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Kiernan.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Medeiros.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Parrish.
Present.
Councillor Starr.
Present.
Mayor Thompson.
Present.
Councillor Vicente.
I'm here.
Chair Yanika. Chair Yanika. Okay. So while we're waiting for Chair Yanika, just for the...
Madam Clerk, there's a couple other councillors. I know they're not voting, but are participating. I see Councillor Sinclair and Councillor Dasco.
Correct. So they'll be noted on the minutes as present.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, it's Chris Fonseca. I'm on as well. I'm not a voting member, but I'm on.
Okay, we'll note you in the attendance. We'll try again, Chair Yanika. Nope. We see him on the list, and we'll just get back to him afterwards. I'll now pass it on to Councillor Parrish. Their Clerk's Division received a delegation request to speak today from Sylvia Roberts, but it is up to the committee if that delegation request will be added to the agenda. And I'll pass it on to Councillor Parrish. Thank you.
Thank you. Normally we have to have at least 2 days notice, but if someone would like to move that we put Sylvia Roberts on for 5 minutes. Councillor Vincenzi, all those who agree to hear the, or how about anybody that doesn't want to hear the delegation? Okay. Sylvia, you've got 5 minutes. Are you here?
We'll just let him join the meeting. Give us a minute. He's in the meeting now. Sylvia?
All right. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. So I'm here to talk about, so this is actually in response to an item on your agenda. That's why it's somewhat late. Next slide. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So my name is Sylvia. I am a resident.
Okay, now we can't hear you, Sylvia.
Sorry, I was watching the live stream so I could see what I was being let in. So my name is Sylvia Roberts. I am a resident of Ward 3 in Brampton. This is actually in response to some of the other items on the agenda today. Next slide. Sorry, back. Previous slide. So all models are wrong, but some are useful. So the province makes its best guess at what the population is going to be. I believe they use Mtsa as the consultant to do that. Generally, this works fine. However, as someone who's paid close attention to Brampton and all the statistics, Brampton is where statistics go to die, and everything you know is wrong. Our assumptions for population are significantly off. For 2021, we estimate that Brampton will have a population of 698,000 people. However, as of mid last year, Statistics Canada estimates the population is at 713,000 people. Because our estimates are actually based off housing completions, but Brampton's population isn't driven by housing completions. It's actually being driven by external factors such as immigration and the number of international students. How this growth has been met is by a rapid, extremely large and rapid growth in the number of rooming houses, both in how many there are, parts of the city, they are now basically everywhere, and how many people live in them. More than a dozen people is now common to be found in rooming houses by bylaw. The current record is 27 people living in one house. Next slide. So part of the issue is the Greater Toronto area actually has a shortage of construction workers. This applies to both residential and commercial, and in residential, there's two sector sites. There's high-rise and low-rise. Our intensification plans for the region are based upon high-rise only. There are physically not enough workers to provide housing fast enough for Peel region. The region really needs to look at alternatives such as Metro Vancouver's frequent transit network development areas, where so frequent bus service also has some intensification around it to permit more low-rise but higher density housing. This can be done by the same workers that are building out McMansions, so you don't need the expensive labor from Toronto at $1,000 a foot. It can be done for much less than half that cost in construction, but it needs to cover a larger area. Next slide. The region also needs to look at more regional transportation planning. Caledon is expected to grow out very quickly to a very large amount of people. And based on all of this, where are the people going to work? They need to be able to get to work. If you put all these people out here, you're going to have transportation issues. The region needs to look at regional transit. For example, a bus rapid transit on Highway 10 from Brampton into Orangeville. Dufferin County, I'm not sure if you're aware, is expected to grow by 50,000 people. Dundalk is building tract townhouses. We're going to have people commuting very long distances, and we need a regional planning of the transportation system to be able, so we don't have 20,000 people a day driving through Caledon Village. Does anyone see that going to work out? Airport Road is another thing. You can connect employment in Mississauga with employment in Brampton, residential, and then into Caledon. We even connect Caledon East. The region needs to be able to plan this because it's a regional road, but it can still be run by, for example, Brampton Transit entities in the short term. So the region needs to do additional planning, and it needs to plan for way more people. Thank you. That's my delegation.
Thank you, Sylvia. That's you've made perfect sense. That's why we're all here today. We're planning for up in Caledon, apparently another 300,000 people. And I agree with you that some sort of transportation that's going to be fewer cars and more buses or rail would be much preferable. But that's our job for the next couple of months. Does anyone else have a question or a comment for Sylvia? Okay, well, thank you very much for your delegation today. You're welcome to audit the rest of the meeting if you'd like to.
We need a motion of receipt, Councillor Parrish.
Yes, who would Mayor Thompson will move receipt of the delegation. All those, anybody object? I got to get used to doing it the other way around. Hi, Adrian. Nice to see you here. Would you like to start with reports 5.1?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd also like to thank Sylvia for bringing forward those matters, and I can assure you that they are matters that we take very seriously and are considering in our work. So starting off with item 1. So Madam Chair, members of committee, and everyone listening in, I'm very pleased to be here for the first meeting of our new Planning and Growth Management Committee. I do believe that our meetings will be great opportunities to have good discussions on the details of our Peel 2041 OP review and municipal comprehensive review, especially as we move forward into the final stages of bringing forward the results of our technical work and feedback from consultation and making recommendations on our work over the next year or so. And to that end, on the agenda today, we're starting with this overview presentation just to remind us about what's new and where we're at. And then through the other items on the agenda, consultants and staff working on our core growth management areas are going to walk you through some of their work and be available to answer questions on some of those details. And this agenda today specifically responds to the request from the December 10th Regional Council meeting, where staff were asked to come back with an opportunity for more detailed dialogue on the materials in the report, which was deferred and is back on the agenda today as item 5.5 for endorsements of the next steps of our process. And we do encourage the committee to endorse the recommendations of that report today once you've heard some more details. I should mention that also on the line today are some local municipal planning staff attending as observers and as a resource, but not as participants in the meeting. And we do thank them very much for their support throughout our work. And we couldn't get to this point without their support of our work and their engagement. And we do thank them as well for attending today. So we can go to the next slide. So as we know, our regional official plan work is required by provincial legislation under the Planning Act, and we must implement provincial policy for Peel, and that's required to be implemented by local official plans. And as we're doing our work at Peel, all 3 local municipalities also have comprehensive official plan reviews underway, and we're working very closely with the local municipal staff to make sure our work is technically solid and reflects public input and appropriately sets out the regional framework that's going to support the strong and progressive community visions that are existing today and emerging and being built upon in the local planning work underway. So next slide. We've been, as you know, we've been undertaking our official plan review now for a number of years, and lots of work has been done. However, we've had to do some starting and stopping and some pausing and making adjustments along the way as the province has been changing its legislation and policies that guide our work. And you'll hear a little bit more in some of the later material today about some of the provincial policy that applies. But we've highlighted here on this slide and the next one some of the changes coming from the province in the last little bit that do affect the overall regional planning framework. First thing to point out is that the 2017 growth plan changed the old definition of an MCR, which typically applied to site-specific employment conversions and individual settlement expansions. They could be initiated either privately or by local municipalities or even by the region, and they did require a regional official plan amendment. Those MCRs in those days were appealable to the OMB or the LPAT, and they often resulted in very long, drawn-out hearings. As of 2017, a municipal comprehensive review must be initiated by the region and must include a comprehensive update of the entire OP. A number of things can only be done through the MCR, such as employment conversions and settlement boundary expansions. Also good to note that the province is now the approval authority for the region's municipal comprehensive review, and it's not appealable to the LPAT as long as the province makes a decision within a prescribed time frame. So that's a new framework we're working under through this MCR. Next slide, please. Some of the other changes built into the 2019 growth plan include the region is required to delineate strategic growth areas in ROP, including major transit station areas. There's a stronger provincial policy around provincially significant employment zones. The region's official plan is now required to actually designate and map employment areas. And then also Amendment 1 to the growth plan in August last year added a new 2051 timeline and growth allocations that we must plan for. Next slide. Also pleased to be able to advise that since we drafted our December 10th report, and over the last few months, we've had some new approvals to incorporate into our official plan. The Mayfield West Phase 2, Stage 2 settlement boundary expansion, which has been underway for many years, did receive provincial approval on January 21st, and secondary planning is now underway. ROPA 30 was approved by the LPAT in an oral decision on November 30th, and that settlement expansion area is now also approved and part of our official plan. And we've updated our mapping here and throughout the presentation and in our LP to reflect both of these approvals. And I know the town and the region and the landowners involved are very happy to be now moving beyond the long process of determining where settlement boundary expansion is going to occur and getting on with the next phases of planning. Next slide, please. Just a bit of context regarding the next steps of planning, particularly for the ROPA 30 lands. The ROPA 30 LPAT hearing was conducted under the policy framework of the 2006 growth plan, and that policy framework predated the 2019 growth plan policies and the provincial approval of a regulation applying the provincially significant employment zones mapping west of the existing Bolton settlement boundary. Provincially significant employment zones, that definition from the province does include both employment lands and mixed uses. And important to be clear that the provincial Mtsas does not automatically change the designation of land. The main policy implication of a PZ is to prohibit the conversion of existing employment designations to other uses subject to specific criteria, and there's no such employment designation in the ROPA 30 area. ROPA 30 doesn't apply actual land use designations, but it does require that 11,100 people and 3,600 jobs be accommodated on the 245 hectares of developable land added by that. And although the option 6 lands that were included are within the PZ, they, along with the other lands added, rounding out Area B, option 1 and 3 lands, they must be planned to accommodate a mix of both employment and population to comply with the ROPA 30 approval and achieve the population and employment targets. It's only the LPAT decision does require that only the triangle lands be protected for employment uses. Next slide, please. Before I turn it over to Tara, I just wanted to mention that all of our work, including the material you'll see today, very much relies on our collaboration with many stakeholders. We have a structure of formal working groups and informal consultation with the local municipal staff for sure, and also which I've mentioned, but also others such as the conservation authorities, development industry. We're working with provincial staff, agricultural community, and engaging with Indigenous communities. And we're looking forward very much to working with this committee and our new planning advisory committee, which incorporates public membership will be starting up later this year. And of course, our ongoing engagement with the public throughout this process to date and yet to come is a crucial part of developing ultimately our conclusions on the technical work and our recommendations to council. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tara, and I think it's the next slide, please.
Adrian, can you just hold on for, Councillor Sinclair has his hand up.
Sorry, I wanted to speak to this process and timeline, so I'll wait. Thanks.
Okay, are there any other questions at this point? Okay, we'll continue.
Okay, thank you very much. So although the official plan process, as Adrian mentioned, did start quite some time ago, and we've had some pauses as a result of some provincial plan changes and policy updates, we are pleased to be nearing the end of our long work plan. We now have about 10 months to bring forward a recommended municipal comprehensive review regional official plan amendment to council for adoption, which will then go to the province for approval. One thing to note on this slide is we are required to submit the draft regional official plan amendment to the province for their formal 90-day review prior to being able to schedule our statutory consultation. So with that in mind, we would be looking to send that to the province towards the end of May or early June. Next slide, please. I think everyone's seen this wheel for probably since almost 2013, but the focus areas on here comprehensively make up the region's official plan review and municipal comprehensive review as required by the province. The two components, age-friendly planning and health and built environment policies, came into effect in 2017 through ROPA 27, but the remaining focus areas on the wheel are all being included in the draft regional official plan amendment that we are currently working on. Next slide, please. Because of the quantity of materials that we are sort of generating and policies through our work, we've staged our public engagement into different theme areas. In March of 2020, the environment-related policies were shared at public consultation events in each of the 3 local municipalities, and the growth-related focus area policies were shared at virtual consultation events held in September. The September consultations also included the findings of the draft technical studies that are required to be completed to support selection and policies for the settlement area boundary expansion work. The remaining policies for growth management, Indigenous engagement, and the settlement area boundary expansion are anticipated to be available for public review and comment as part of the overall regional official plan amendment, again, which we're targeting to be before council by June. Next slide, please. Through our technical studies and consultation that we've undertaken to date, there's been a number of theme areas that have emerged that sort of span beyond one focus area. So we just wanted to highlight these. I'm not going to go through them all, but integrating climate change throughout the regional official plan, managing growth in a fiscally responsible manner, and ensuring healthy and complete development, which includes the importance of exploring options for better recognizing Peel's diversity. Next slide, please. A couple more, and again, I won't get into too much detail, but recognizing the need to have some strong policies related to affordable housing, responding to a changing economy, and encouraging active transportation are a couple additional policy areas. Next slide, please. Our Peel 2041 process includes a very comprehensive consultation component, and different tools are being used to address all 3 consultation objectives: inform, involve, and collaborate. We've released various videos to support public education, social media campaigns, simplified fact sheets, attended farmers markets and community events, had online comment portals, virtual open house display boards, and mapping platforms for the public and stakeholders to be able to participate. And throughout it all, we continued our ongoing engagement with our municipal partners. We've received comments from a number of stakeholders on draft policies as we've undertaken our work to date, and we continue to consider these comments as we proceed with drafting our regional official plan amendment. As we enter the final year of our review, we will continue to build on the consultation successes that we've seen over the past years and ensure that we're consulting on the new deliverables that have come out recently from the December 10th report. And we also look forward to continuing to work with this committee and the new Planning Advisory Committee to advance our review. Next slide, please. The blue consultation shapes on the slide indicate our continued informal consultation to raise awareness of our official plan review, and again, to consult on these new draft deliverables that were included as part of the December 10th report and that are before you on the agenda today. Those include allocation, major transit station area policies and mapping, as well as settlement area boundary expansion work. We are targeting having a draft municipal comprehensive review amendment to this committee in June of this year, where we will be seeking council's endorsement to proceed with statutory consultation in September. The green shapes in 2021 show our remaining large milestones in order to meet the provincial conformity deadline of July 1st, 2022. Last slide, please. Our goal for today is to obtain your feedback on the information presented and the draft policies and next steps as were included in the December 10th report. Any input we receive today will help us inform our ongoing engagement work and development of our draft Regional Official Plan Municipal Comprehensive Review Amendment. The slide mentions the April committee, but since the presentation was prepared, there's now a March Planning and Growth Management Committee, so we're working on the agendas for both of those meetings, and we'll be bringing forward environment-related topics as part of these upcoming meetings. I'm not going to go through the other dates on the slide because they were covered previously, but all in all, we're well on our way to meeting the July 1st, 2022 deadline. And that concludes the presentation, and Adrian and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, does anyone have any questions? Martin, Councilor Medeiros?
Thank you very much for you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. So just for my understanding and background regarding in terms of option 6 under ROPA 30, do we still require, or does it still require local approval?
Through you, Madam Chair. Ultimately, the local planning framework and the local official plan has yet to be put in place. But the principle of development and settlement boundary expansion and the allocation of population and employment is established through ROPA 30. That exists. That's in place today. And now that local planning process, I understand, is sort of being initiated by the landowners in the town, and the region will be participating. So it's just needs that the local detail yet to come.
So, and again, and just for benefit, I know some of my colleagues newer to council. So through you, Chair, in terms of the option 6, that has, based on recent LPAT, that is all residential for option 6, if that, minus a triangle.
Through you, Madam Chair, predominantly yes. The population and employment needs to be applied across the ROPA 30 designated area, and the local planning needs to plan for both of those things. So it'll be predominantly community lands.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sinclair.
Yes, thank you. I just wish to express concerns over the timeline. Up in Caledon, where the planning department, we're short on senior policy planners. And one of them is just about to leave, so we'll be extra short. And there are major mapping changes coming in terms of wetlands, aggregate resources, and natural heritage systems. All of those have really important implications for landowners' enjoyment of use of their lands. So having meaningful notice and information to landowners of these changes is very important to us. And I pointed out that for Brampton and Mississauga, this is rather insignificant, but in North Peel, it matters a great deal. So I just expressed concern there that the provincial government timeline may not fit because we can't hold proper public meetings face-to-face with maps to explain to people what these maps affect their lands.
Thank you. Can you make a comment on that, Adrian?
Yeah, I would just point out that I do appreciate that the regional official plan review is a significant process and will have significant implications across the region. Fortunately, though, very fortunately, the environmental work, including the environmental policies and the environmental mapping, is something that we were able to proceed with and do a lot of work earlier in the process. And you'll recall just before the pandemic hit us in March of last year, we did have some we were able to hold in-person open houses, and we were able to bring forward the draft environmental environmental policies, all that mapping, two public sessions, and had face-to-face with folks on that mapping. And it's been on our website, and we've been receiving comments and feedback. So we are fortunate in that regard, but I certainly we are working towards fairly aggressive timelines.
Councillor Sinclair, do you?
I thought I saw a note that the province has just released new wetland mapping in late 2020. Right? I think it's a moving target. That's my concern. Thank you. And the aggregate studies are not complete. So there's still lots up in the air. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Innes.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. One, I'd like to make a suggestion for this planning committee based on Councillor Medeiros' questions, and then Adrian's response, because I sort of feel that perhaps members and colleagues, Mississauga, Brampton, who have a different planning process that Caledon has through the region appeal, don't understand the planning process in Caledon and how it differs from Brampton and Mississauga when it comes to region appeal. I also think that based on the questions and comments, they don't actually understand ROPA 30 and the resolution that was agreed upon by all parties. And I think that it will have a big impact on the decisions and the recommendations that this committee will actually move forward. So I'd like to make a recommendation that at the next committee meeting that we actually have a presentation from staff solely on ROPA 30, because it's very clear to me, just based on those questions and that response, that there isn't an understanding about the process and about the outcomes of that and how that will impact planning decisions that we make. You know, the answer of the question of will this be all residential, and the answer of that predominantly yes, that's not entirely true. The answer is there will be industrial commercial aspects on those lands, as well as the other options that are part of that settlement agreement. And there will be residential on those other options as part of this settlement agreement that the region will be responsible for. And so I really feel that based on those questions, and the fact that, I understand that the process that, you know, Councillor Medeiros, as an example, is used to going through in Brampton is not the same process that Caledon Planning goes through. And it's not the same process that Mississauga and Brampton have the same process. We have a different one. And I think that that needs to be clear and understanding, because that will impact the recommendations that this committee puts forward. So I'm going to ask the chair to consider that for a future meeting. I think it would be beneficial for all of us around this table to have a better understanding of it. And then in regard to the timeline and Councillor Sinclair's comments, I have grave concerns with the timeline. I have concerns that there's going to be a provincial election before we even get to adopting and requiring their approval. And so I guess I'm wondering, what is the process of when we're to be completed and sending it off to the province? I think you said July of 2022. What are the requirements? Can it be enacted before that? And then I guess to Councillor Sinclair's point, Caledon's OP process is moving simultaneously as the regions, and we rely on information from the region from a Caledon perspective to make Caledon decisions, and we rely on Caledon's decisions from the region to make regional decisions. And I know that regional staff and town staff are working closely, but I'm concerned that those timelines are so overlapped that we're not going to make them. The town's not going to make them, the region's not going to make them, or we're going to be making rush decisions. And I'd like to hear Adrian's comments about, you know, I had a meeting last week with some of our consultants doing the town's portion, and they were waiting on work from the region before they could actually give Caledon their recommendation, which just stalls Caledon's decision making, which you need in order to pass your official plan. So you can see how it's evolving and around the table, and I also fear that my colleagues from Mississauga and Brampton don't understand that process because they don't have the same process. and they don't see the challenges that Caledon is facing through this entire process. So Adrian, maybe you want to speak to that, and then maybe asking if we could actually have something dedicated specifically so that the colleagues around this table in particular better understand the planning differences and the processes and the challenges faced by that.
Through Madam Chair, just quickly, in terms of the overall timeline and the complexity of things, no question, there's lots of moving parts, and as has been mentioned many times, we are working very closely with the local municipalities. I would point out that, just as Caledon is, both Mississauga and Brampton are currently going through their local official plan reviews as well, and very much a collaboration between the work that the region's doing and the overall planning framework that we're establishing. There is a bit of iterative nature to that for sure, but ultimately us moving through this process quickly in order to provide that framework and deliver the information that we can to get on with the local planning work, we think is important, and we think we're well positioned to do that. We think there's lots of good work going on underway. No question, there's moving parts there, and there's time pressures, but we have the opportunity to move through the process, bring the information forward as we can, and stepwise, council has the ability to choose to move forward to the next step or ask for more information. With these meetings that we've got now with this committee, there's an even more opportunity to do that. In terms of the overall timelines, again, it's stepwise. What Tara articulated there was that we're bringing forward draft. Hopefully, have a fairly robust, complete set of draft work in before the summer, where we'd be seeking your authorization not to approve it finally, but just to move forward into the next phase of consultation, the statutory consultation under the Planning Act, which would then unfold, and we'd be asking for you to make a decision on that, hopefully by the end of this year, in order that it can then be decided, go off to the province and have them deal with it before the timeline of middle next year. So, and at each step along the way, council really is in the driver's seat in terms of moving forward to that next step. We think that it's not going to be easy. There's lots of work underway. There's lots of pressures to do that, but moving forward in a way that the region can complete its work and provide that guidance and input and framework for the local official plans to move forward is really important. There has been a lot of provincial policy change. There's lots of change in our communities. The delegate earlier this afternoon pointed out that just the tip of the iceberg in terms of some of those changes. And I think it's important that both the region's policy framework and the local policy framework, evolves and adjusts and isn't in a continuous sort of review cycle. That we do implement some of the work that's been done at the local and the regional level, relatively quickly. We kind of get on with it. So, but there's a few thoughts on that, and for sure, if there's information council would like on implementation, we can bring forward information on that. And we are waiting for the written decision from the LPAT on the ROPA 30, which will also provide a format for some of that as well.
So just to follow up on the first part, are you expecting the 3 partner municipalities to have their draft OPs approved and submitted to you before you get your draft to the regional council?
No, not at all. Not at all. What we're hoping to do, though, is the work that's underway that it can inform our work, and we're hoping to have our work completed in such a way that it provides a solid, concrete, and approved sort of foundation for the local work, while taking into consideration the work that's underway. And there's certainly no expectation or requirement from us to sort of dictate that the timing and the staging of that local process. Just merely as the work is done, we're happy to be informed and use that information in our work.
And what about the timing of the completion of the review and the adoption of it, and in regards to what is province's role in adopting or approving our ROPA, and what are their timelines if a provincial election is called earlier, or they become unable to any decisions because of a provincial. How does that affect our process, or does it affect it at all?
So once council adopts the ROPA, the province has a certain number of days. I believe it's 120 days to approve it. And they've committed to all the municipalities across the province that they're teed up and anxious to do that. So assuming our timeline is achieved and we're looking at council adoption by the end of this year, then into the early part of next year, next spring, we'd be looking for provincial approval. But again, that's something that we can continue to monitor as we go through the next year in terms of what happens on the provincial election cycle.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll leave it with the chair and with Adrian that perhaps at the next procedure and policy committee that we could actually have a ROPA 30 dirty down brief, if you will, about from start to finish and the actual planning processes and the impacts that it will have on the decisions that we make as a council, because it is distinctly different in Caledon than it is in Brampton and Mississauga, and that process will have to unfold, and I think it would benefit all of us to have that information and be on the same page.
Thank you. Martin, you had your hand up. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, and thank you through you, Chair. And first of all, I do want to appreciate the comments by my colleagues, Councillor Sinclair and Councillor Innes, and I do appreciate, and I confess I don't know, what would be the process planning differences between Caledon and neighboring jurisdictions. So I certainly won't refute that there's a learning opportunity there. I guess where I'm getting from this, and Adrian answered part of my question when we talked about providing some framework to ensure there's some consistency and alignment from the local municipalities. And then my second aspect, and again, and I don't know if I'm speaking out of term, I guess my concern is where you have an LPAT decision and we have finally all parties on board. So we have sort of in good faith an agreement where, if you asked me years ago, could we get this agreement, I would be very suspect. And so we have a potential opportunity to move forward. And I'm not going to, again, I don't want to get into the weeds in terms of, because I don't know the local issues in Caledon. I'm not going to pretend to, say, all I'm saying is from a regional perspective, from a Brampton taxpayer perspective since day one, and I've been very consistent, that when we got to the stage where we're at, we have an LPAT decision. It gives us some guidelines. We have opportunity to sort of move ahead in this process. I just don't want us to get into a point, and I'm not trying to push, Caledon or anyone else, but I just don't want to get to a point where the parties who signed off on something then start questioning what we're going to be doing on our end to move this process forward. And then that starts unraveling. And I know, LPAT, the decision is legal binding, and but I just, and that's my concern. I don't need a comment per se, and if staff do want to sort of jump in and provide a comment, more than happy. It's just that when we're seen to finally find sort of that we crack that nut and we see some light of the day, and I think all of us consistent on council want to move forward with this process. Certainly respecting the local planning perspective, certainly really driving this process with Caledon as Caledon leading and really aligning itself with regional direction. But if we look at some of the missing, we have a council resolution that sends to the province requesting an MZO. We have an LPAT decision. We have an opportunity to move forward, and I just don't want us to sort of lose that sort of that movement. And I know, understanding there's all the technical discussions, but hearing Adrian, it does seem that there's some opportunity for us to move forward with the process. And I just hope that we can collectively move towards that goal. And that's essentially what I would say with that. And I just don't want to lose this opportunity, because I would love to, notwithstanding, move ahead as a region, but I also, this discussion, I think, has been challenging for us for over the last couple of years. And to the newer councillors, I'm not opposed, Councillor Innes, to bring forward some, a robust conversation about ROPA 30 and for us to really understand all the sort of pieces and all the sort of impacts on the local community. I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I'll leave it to the chair and yourself to sort of organize that. But, you know, that's essentially it. I just don't want to lose that good momentum and that we have everybody on the table playing ball. And so that's my number one concern.
Thank you, Martin. And Adrian, we've had this conversation earlier this week. I suggested you could give, I guess, not an in-camera, but a summary of what we were told by Mr. D'Agostino and what all the parties were told by Mr. D'Agostino to do with option 6's ability to be a mixed-use residential community. And I think we all signed in good faith. We, as a region, took his word that that matter was essentially over and it would be left the way we had intended. We were at $1 million in legal fees and heading into 21 weeks of legal harassment. So could you again give us a quick summary, if it's possible, of what Mr. D'Agostino suggested? If we can't get that clarified, what I'll do at the next council meeting is ask to have his in-camera notes released to this committee, and we can go in camera to look at them. But I was very concerned at the beginning that we would get this all cleared up, everybody'd walk off with their little pieces, and then Caledon would say, but wait a minute, we don't like that, man, and we're not going to approve any residential in option 6. And that's what I was concerned about, and that's why I asked you, Adrian, because I knew this was going to come up today. It's inevitable. It was a crucial part of this whole planning process for years. So if you can make a comment now, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I would just sort of reiterate what I touched on, which is that ROPA 30 does not apply local designations, but it does apply an overall population and employment allocation, and that in order to comply with ROPA 30, when Caledon does its local planning, which it must do, its local official plan and its secondary plan, it must plan to accommodate those. And in order to do that, the lands need to be planned for community lands. That majority of them need to be planned for community lands to accommodate, you know, the typical population, retail employment, other types of employment, and in order to comply. And the provincially significant employment zone or mapping that applies is there, but you know, its operative effects are to prohibit conversion of existing employment designations, which don't exist in the ROPA 30 land. So it's kind of there and sits there. And the PZ definition from the province does contemplate both employment lands and mixed use lands. And you know, that'll be the framework that that's applied as the local planning happens in Caledon.
Don't waste a lot of, we're not wasting a minute. It's all important, but so we don't get into a long debate on this, what I'm going to suggest is I will go to the next council meeting and ask permission to release those in-camera notes from Mr. D'Agostino and give them to you, and we'll do a quick summary for the committee and clarify everything for everyone, I hope. And we won't go on much longer now because we've got a lot of material to cover. Do you have a quick comment, Councillor Innes?
I do. And so my intention wasn't about specific to option 6. My intention was, and I think that Adrian mentioned that the minutes of settlement are coming out publicly and that they're going to be reporting back to council. And my intention was to show that Councillor Medeiros asked specifically about one option out of the 6. The settlement agreement contains stuff for all 6 of those options, which are now going to have to move forward from a servicing level, from a planning level. And my point is simply that I think that this committee would benefit from understanding how all of that, how all of those options tied to the servicing and everything moving forward is to proceed. It's not about one option over another or any of that. I think that this committee would benefit as a whole from understanding what that settlement actually detailed and the implications from a regional perspective about how that development is going to roll out and Caledon's role versus the region's role. I think that that's important because it wasn't just given to option 6 there was allocation spread, and I think that that needs to be delivered, and we need to understand that as a region. So it wasn't. I'm not sure if you need to release what was in camera to this group. I think that settlement, the minutes of settlement that are coming out and are published, dictate what Peel is responsible for, what Caledon is responsible for. And I think that that information just shared here and an understanding about the processes at different levels would benefit all. That's all I was suggesting.
Okay, and to that end, I'm sure we're going to be looking at all those settlements. There was population kind of shifted around and added to other locations and other options. I think that was very clear in the settlement that we all signed or we agreed to sign. So, Adrian, can we put that on a quick track for the next meeting on March the 18th?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I may, Patrick O'Connor would like to speak.
Absolutely. Patrick, welcome.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to emphasize the validity of what Councillor Innes just said about the fact that I think everything that the committee may be interested in learning about the implications of the settlement and of the LPAT's adoption of the settlement can be presented to the committee. Adrian has a great handle on it. I would suggest that it's not really necessary to bring the solicitor-client privileged legal advice that the Oversight Committee received forward in order to get those answers and to get that analysis that you quite legitimately expect and need. So I offer that perspective. I have a concern with the release of the privileged information. If there are any concerns on the part of the Oversight Committee with any discrepancies, we could address that in camera. I don't anticipate that that would be the case, but I think that's the better way to proceed rather than to bring the privileged material into public session.
Patrick, I'm just disappointed we couldn't, I gave everybody a heads up. I'm disappointed we couldn't deal with it today, but that's as it is. Okay, can we go on to anybody else want to ask any questions? Okay, we'll move on to the next section.
We just need a motion of receipt for Adrian and Tara's presentation.
Yes, ma'am. Could I have a motion for receipt? Councillor Carlson, anybody object? Thank you. Next section, please.
Duran, you may start presentation.
Perfect. Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Good afternoon, members of the Planning and Growth Management Committee. My name is Duran Wedderburn, and I'm here today to provide you with a presentation on the growth management focus area. The presentation will cover the key findings shared in the December 10th staff report and offer an opportunity to provide more details on the analysis that underpins the growth management work. Joining me today to assist with the presentation is Russell Matthew from Hemson Consulting, who will be presenting some of the analysis that supports our preliminary findings. We will look forward to your feedback and continuing to work with you to develop and refine our work. Next slide. The growth management focus area is a key component of the Peel 2041 Plus official plan review. The results and outcomes of this work have implications for numerous focus areas, including major transit station areas, employment planning, housing, settlement area boundary expansion, and capital planning through the growth management program. This includes determining where and how new population and employment will be planned, serviced, and financed in an integrated manner that promotes healthy, complete, and livable communities. The policy outcomes of the growth management focus area supports regional growth in a comprehensive and balanced manner. Next slide. The growth management work is driven by provincial policies that allocate forecasted growth and provide direction on how the growth should be planned and managed. In June of 2020, staff presented a GM Focus Area Policy Directions report to Regional Council, with the best information available at the time on municipal growth allocations, densities, intensification targets, and employment planning. The information was based on our growth forecast to 2041, with the understanding that the province had released draft forecast to 2051, and the proposed changes would impact the GM focus area. Staff have been working with the local municipal planning staff to build on this work completed in 2041 to prepare the 2051 municipal growth allocations and preliminary land needs assessment. Next slide. The region's growth management work is supported by evidence-based analysis prepared in collaboration with stakeholders supported by infrastructure master planning. One component area of managing growth is transportation. The region's long-range transportation plan serves as the basis for supporting transportation infrastructure needs to address increasing demand on the overall network. The LRTP prioritizes region-wide strategies that support increased mobility through the 50% sustainable mode share target. The provincial policy drivers and technical background work in the GM focus area support the analysis and recommendations forthcoming. Next slide. The updated growth plan released in August of 2020 extends the planning horizon from 2041 to 2051 and also increases the amount of growth forecasted to Peel to 2.3 million people and 1.1 million jobs, which is an additional 300,000 people and 100,000 jobs compared to 2041. Building on the work completed to 2041, the region has worked with the local municipalities and our consultant to prepare a preliminary 2051 growth forecast. The preliminary results indicate a population of 1 million people for Brampton and Mississauga and 300,000 for Caledon. This growth is driven by several factors, including greenfield development shifting from Brampton to Caledon over the planning horizon, a greater emphasis on intensification through transit-supportive development in key corridors and at GO stations, and some of the emerging work in Brampton regarding Heritage Heights and the Brampton 2040 vision. Next slide. Peel is forecasted to accommodate a significant amount of growth at 2051. Much of this growth will be directed to existing areas through intensification, but additional lands through settlement area boundary expansion will be required. The land need for the region was estimated at 4,300 hectares in December. However, based on further refinement and consultation, additional lands may be required. To manage the forecasted growth, the region will require consideration for the staging and phasing of growth and financial implementation planning tools. At this point, I would like to introduce Russell Matthew from Hemson Consulting, who will present a few slides on the trends and analysis that's underpin and support our draft municipal allocation. Next slide.
Thanks, Duran. Building on Duran's description of the policy environment, I'm going to talk a little bit about the numbers that go with that. Peel has a lot of experience in managing growth. And if you look at this just in 30-year blocks from way back from 1961 to 91, Peel added about 640,000 people. And then in the next 30-year period up to from 1991 to 2021 to today, it's about 820,000. And then going forward for the forecast period for the next 30 years, it's about another 700,000 on that. So, I mean, this is really just continuing the kind of growth that the region of Peel has had for a very long time. So this is not something you're unused to. On the employment side, Peel has also done very well in terms of attracting employment. It is one of only a handful of regions or counties in Southern Ontario where there is more jobs in the community than there are people living in the community with jobs. That is, that there's net in commuting. That's something that usually only occurs in really the historic central cities, such as Toronto, but the region of Peel is in that club. So that's doing very, very well for the kind of area it is. Now, early in the 2010s, in the decade just completed, employment growth was a little slow coming off of the 08-09 recession, and so we were a little behind on the forecast at that time, and that was that had all sorts of implications really about generally the amount of growth, the amount of non-residential development, and I know that council is quite familiar with the issue of falling a bit short on the non-residential development charges as a result of that. mind you, what happened in the right up to the start of the pandemic was that the employment growth had accelerated quite a bit. So we really would have caught up to the old forecast by 2021 had we not had the pandemic. Now, that's that's of course speculative because that's of course not going to happen the way it has. And and Peel is in particular is quite hard hit on the employment side from the current pandemic, particularly because a large proportion of Canada's air transportation industry is located in the region of Peel, and that just on its own is has been it's the worst hit industry in the country, and traveling is down something like 95%. So this is has enormous implications just in itself, separate from the rest that's going on with things like retail and food and accommodation and the like. But nevertheless, we shall recover from this in due time. Next slide, please. So the long-term pattern of growth in the region is really kind of a somewhat predictable progression in a way, is that in the coming decades, as Mississauga and well, really by the 1990s, the city of Mississauga had built up most of its greenfield area, and then Brampton had a very rapid boom since then. But in the next 10 to 15 years, Brampton will exhaust the greenfield development lands, and then in a sense it's Caledon's turn. Now it doesn't move quite in lockstep like that, but it's pretty close, and you can see that from the graphic. The pattern of growth. The thing that's very different going forward from the past, though, is that, at their peak points, Mississauga and Brampton were around 70 to 80% of the region's growth. But because of quite a bit of intensification has been now planned for, is that Caledon in this chart, peaks at about 40% of the region's growth when it's going really sort of full bore on the greenfield part of it, because there's so much of the development is now planned for intensification. Next slide, please. The employment growth is a little bit more complicated. As I mentioned, some of those issues already. The growth rate over the next 30 years will be about half of what it was in the last 30 years. That's not special for Peel. That's going to happen everywhere in the country, and that's really because of an aging population. If you look at the graphic here, we're in a again, COVID aside, we are in a bit of a sweet spot in terms of employment, which is where all of the baby boomers, or the peak of the baby boomers, are still in the labor force, and their millennia and their children, who are the millennials, the peak of count of the millennials, are also in the labor force at the same time. So there's just this, a few years here where it crosses over, and of course the bulk of the baby boom in a very few years will have retired. So so we are in a place where there's been very rapid employment growth. Peel's got a large share of that, and but in the future, it's just going to be slower, just generally because of that. But Peel is still well positioned to accommodate a good share of that growth in the Greater Toronto area. Certainly with the big share of the Greater Toronto area office market, as well as the employment areas, which are still developing out in Mississauga and Brampton, and the significant addition of employment land in Caledon, particularly along the GTA West corridor. One of the things to note, though, about the slower growth is that it does make change more difficult, just because there's sort of less to go around to change things. And in the case of Brampton, it's particularly challenging because Brampton has a relatively low activity rate, the ratio of employment to population, and does have a highly desirable goal to increase that a lot. It's just that it is going to be a challenge to do so because of the pie is just not quite as large to work from on that. Next slide, please. The really big shift, though, in this plan compared to the past is really about housing type. This is really the overriding change, in a sense, is how people are housed through this plan because of the greater focus on intensification. Most intensification is in apartment type units. So so that there is, there already is this shift occurring in the market, and what we see here that you'll notice in the where we go from the past to the future in 2021 to 2026, that first 5-year period, actually a third of that quite large bar of apartment units, a third of that is already under construction in the city of Mississauga as we speak. So there really is, this shift is going on as we speak in part, but it is nevertheless a very significant change in housing patterns and the way people are housed and that type of thing. And that's something that's and it's something that's not certain that can be achieved. So there is, that's really sort of the somewhat aspirational aspect of the plan, but it's not outside of. It's not entirely unreasonable. If we go to the next slide, please, it actually sort of following on this point is that the province does have a new land needs assessment methodology, which is very directly on issue about the change in housing types. So the land needs assessment methodology does require the region to, to capture these changes that are that need to happen in order to achieve, growth plan and municipal planning objectives around intensification. But it is very clear now that that needs to be balanced with an understanding of what the housing market demands, which is generally more focused on ground-related housing. So one of the biggest decisions being asked of regional council in this process is just how to strike that balance between intensification and more apartment-oriented housing versus greenfield development and more ground-related housing, and how one strikes the balance between those the market demands and the policy. So that is something, just to put that out there. We're going to be discussing that a lot more over the next year, I expect. So with that, I would turn it back over to Duran, and he's going to talk a little bit about implementation and next steps.
Okay, can we stop for a moment, please? Sure. I have 3 hands up. Are the 3 hands wanting to ask their questions now? Okay, I have first Councillor Sinclair, then Mayor Thompson, and then Councillor Vincenzi. Councillor Sinclair.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to express some concern about Caledon's allocated population growth numbers, and supposed to get 30,000 additional population in 11 years, and another 270,000 in the next 20 years. And it looks like 3.7 times our population in the next 31 years, all greenfield. So it's quite a challenge. I thought we did a reasonable job in Mayfield West so far. And so it's just, I don't know if that's realistic, is my expression. And really, looking at the delegation we just had at the beginning of the meeting, we need high volume, high capacity LRT system in Peel to handle this. You just can't put all that population up top and expect them to filter through every year looking for a job in Brampton and Mississauga. So that's my concern. Thank you.
Alan, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Questions from Russell here. One is, we're talking about employment, but here's a 2-part question. We got a lot of people working from home because of COVID. A lot of people will probably not be returning to the office. One is, how are we going to be able to count when they're working from home as an employment factor? And 2 is, how is that going to work for apartments? Because that's where a lot of the mental breakdown is happening right now, is people are crammed in an apartment trying to work versus being in the office. So I think there's some challenges here that have we thought that through as we go forward, because it's definitely going to affect on how we go forward and plan. I have one more question, but that's what I'll throw at you first.
Okay. Through you, Madam Chair. Well, yes, we have accounted for this to a degree. It's still not clear really how this will all play out in terms of office versus work at home. The data we have on work at home, which we collect from the census, coming up in May of this year, is really about home-based businesses and people who work at home all of the time. So if it's some of the time, but you still have an office elsewhere, then you're not supposed to be counted as work at home. Nevertheless, it is fairly clear that there's going to be a portion of the workforce is going to at least spend a portion of the week at home in a way that they had not in the past. That probably means not that much necessarily on the residential side for ground-related housing, but it does suggest that there may be a reduced demand or higher amount of employees within the existing office space. So that's something we're mindful of, but again, we don't quite know how it'll play out. And the question you raised around the apartment living and working from home is. Well, that is an issue and it's a challenge for sure. So and how well, and then so we haven't necessarily accounted for that. You would need. I'm not sure if that would really be a basis to shift the housing types particularly, but it is something to be mindful of.
The one thing I'm going to bring up here, and it's really for the next report as well, but here's the challenge that we have with Caledon is we're taking on a lot of residential, but we need to take on a lot of employment. I only got 25 acres of employment land available right now. So I kind of need to get this official plan through so I can release employment land, because if not, I'm going to have to ask for a lot of MZOs that I don't think is really a good way of doing anything, period, because we're turning businesses away, which is unfortunate. But here's the challenge I've got. As you know, Caledon's 80% protected, and that'll follow up in the next report as well, but I think I need to bring it here. In order to keep that sustainable, I need to double my employment tax base, land tax base, in order to make it sustainable. It's about the sustainable part of the municipality with all the growth as well. And that's just one of those challenges I'm going to throw back at you. I know I'm not asking for an answer today, but I think that's something that we really have to think about as we go through this exercise. But I got to say, thank you very much. Your data is excellent.
Thank you.
Paul?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Russell, for that explanation. The idea, so when you say that apartments need to be 50% of future units, does that mean across the entire region of Peel, or is it to be in specific areas?
Through you, Madam Chair, the first of all, the 50%, that's just the new development on the increment. So that the overall stock doesn't change that much because there's a large existing base. Most of that is concentrated in the areas where the intensification occurs. So that would be mostly in Mississauga, a large number in Brampton, and relatively fewer in Caledon through this period.
Okay. And I appreciate the mayor's question with regards to what will the future of work be. And I've always thought, and I even know some businesses located in the Bolton area that for many years, they were from home operations, and eventually they were able to purchase commercial property and move out from that home office and grow, et cetera. But I think that even prior to COVID, and we'd had discussions here at the region about this as well, that there really is a need to recognize the importance of those small home-based businesses and them being able to operate within their home. And I can tell you from my travels in places in Europe that especially in the more urban areas, the idea of having a home office in a high-rise apartment or building or condominium is really attractive because you have the amenities of the city nearby. And I think that has to be part of this kind of a home-based business. And for our zoning and our bylaws and our planning to foresee that and to plan for it. And thank you.
Star?
Oh, okay. I didn't hear anything. The question I have, and it's based on projections, and when you see the charts or the matrix there, and you see the phenomenal growth for 30 years, and then when I put it in a separate silo for employment, and let's use 3-2-1, where it's the employment from Caledon to Brampton to Mississauga. To me, what jumps out is the transportation, because if you have that increase in the populations as you keep going north, are we going to have sufficient transportation corridors to accomplish this, especially the north-south? All you have to do is now go on the 410 first thing in the morning. You can see as even towns like Orangeville and Shelburne or whatever grow, all the headlights coming south. And to me, even if we put something together with the home base or off-site, and I know this is, a lot of theory here, but how do we handle that? What sort of projections are you folks working with to say, is there going to be a massive change in the employment or the type of employment that we're going to have? And is it going to be, commercially based, industrially based in the typical fashion, the traditional fashion we have now? Anyway, that's kind of a rambling, and I got a couple of other small questions.
Well, I would. I'll leave the discussion of the transportation system to somebody else. But the thing about employment is that it does change quite a bit at the margin. That is, the growth that's occurring, and we talk about, the sectors that are really growing and the ones that aren't, and that can be quite different from what the overall base doesn't change nearly as much as I think we mostly imagine from what we see around us. So in a 30-year period, there will be shifts, but probably, but not of a scale that would sort of change everything in a way that from the way we're looking at it. And in fact, we do accommodate quite a bit of that change. There's much less employment growth in the employment lands of the industrial type areas going forward than there's been in the past, for certain, as well, and much more in the offices and more in the at home as well. So,
well, okay, so that doesn't really answer it, because what are the patterns? Is there some group or consortium or whatever across the country that's looking at this? Because there has been a change even in the last 10 and 20 years of people working off-site. And I can think of one group, mortgage brokers. They always used to have a office in the downtown or in their locale, like Mississauga or Brampton. Now, I can think of half a dozen people I know, they're working from home because they have all the technological aids and computers and ability to, say, go into all the data they need instead of always relying on traditional offices. And to me, I see a trend. I see a real big trend that this is going to change massively. And I think Councillor Vicente mentioned that even with the intensification, the traditional den that we used to call a den or maybe a TV room or whatever, that's going to be an office at home. And I think that's changing already. So to me, I think those things have to be addressed, not today, but I mean, as we go along with it, there has to be flexibility as we see those changes really, really happening.
If I may, I think those are very good points and questions, and that's something that we can definitely take back and continue to further examine in terms of our ongoing work. So taking a look at work from home and the impacts on office development and the need for office moving forward. The other piece is on transportation that you did mention, and I'm wondering if any of our transportation colleagues can perhaps speak to the region's long-range transportation plan.
Is there anyone?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. Terry Ricketts here. Can you hear me? That's great. So yes, absolutely, Councillor Starr, the long-range transportation plan does include modeling to forecast in what way we would need to accommodate that future growth and those trends that we've just been talking about. And furthermore, beyond just the borders of Peel Region, of course, or our mandate, work in cooperation with higher levels of government to advance key projects such as our advocacy for the extension of 427 are also key to meeting some of those meeting the future demands.
Okay, and this is, of course, we're in the preliminary stages of all of this. Today's discussion, the methodology and the assessment that we're doing now is a great start, and I think this is the committee, or this is the group to start taking charge and of where we're going, because it's so important. Because it's going to happen. I mean, we have these people that have been flowing into Peel for the last 20 years. It has not changed one iota. And I think the number, I mean, I always used to use the number, there's between births and new arrivals is something like 80 a day. And that hasn't changed. It's going to keep on going. There's nothing barring some government saying there's no more growth. But that's, to me, it's there, and I think we have to provide for this. So I'm glad to be part of this. But I mean, I realize it's not going to happen today or next week or next month. It's ongoing. So I'll leave that with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm watching the clock, folks, and I think we're going to have to keep the soliloquies down a little bit. That's not addressed at you, Ron. That's at all of us, and try to keep our questions sharp and the answers sharp. I have one question. I don't want to throw you into shock, but we're talking about the GTA West corridor becoming a major employment area. Anybody thinking of an alternative if that corridor gets canceled? Are we even looking at that, or are we just assuming it's going to go in?
Through you, Madam Chair, maybe I can jump on that. For sure, we have as part of the region's long-range transportation plan, it has incorporated in sort of long-term planning for the GTA West, and we've modeled transportation with and without. Definitely, there's going to need to be significant transportation infrastructure, with or without the GTA West, and that's sort of part of the ongoing work that we're doing. For example, we know that that Northwest Brampton is going to need significant north-south transportation infrastructure, whether it's a boulevard or whether it's more of a highway in nature. Those are the very questions that are explored and being built into this kind of process.
Good, thank you very much. Can we now go to the next section? And we're going to try to keep this a little sharper as we go forward.
If I may, Madam Chair, I think there are just a couple slides to wrap up and discuss next steps on the growth management piece.
Thank you.
No problem. So next slide, if you could, Stephanie. Thank you. So the provincial policy framework informs how the region builds its regional structure that guides where and how forecasted growth will be directed through policy areas and targets. The regional structure in Peel is informed by policy areas such as the Greenbelt, designated greenfield areas, the built-up area, which is the primary area for intensification, and urban growth centers. These policy areas support the where and how the forecasted growth is accommodated, as mentioned earlier. Next slide. To support how forecasted growth is accommodated, the growth management policy framework is supported by the transportation policy framework, which focuses on 4 themed areas for consideration, including the integration of land use and transportation planning through transportation demand management programming in planning and development areas, improving active transportation through network improvements in existing and future transit hubs and major transit station areas, working with the local municipalities and agencies to plan and facilitate safe and efficient mobility choices, and being future ready to respond to the changing nature of transportation to provide access to new major hubs and employment areas. Next slide. As mentioned previously, the growth management framework is supported by policy areas that guide the where and how we manage growth. To complement this work, and as a result of provincial planning changes, we're proposing the addition of 2 new schedules to the GM work in the official plan. Strategic growth areas, inclusive of major transit station areas and urban growth centers, build on the regional structure and is supported by provincial, regional, and local priorities to direct population and employment growth to areas supported by transit investments to increase mobility and the integration between land use and transit. While the current regional official plan does not identify all strategic growth areas, the local municipal plans and recent local planning studies identify key opportunities for accommodating intensification. The region is working with the local municipalities to ensure the new and emerging strategic growth areas are recognized for their ability to support higher density developments with the appropriate framework. All strategic growth areas do not need to be advanced in the planning horizon, but rather there's plenty of supply in the current forecasts and well beyond 2051. Next slide. The region also is now required to map designated employment areas. These are areas that are to be protected from employment conversions to accommodate existing and future jobs. The modernized employment policies build on the existing regional and local employment official plan policy and designations, provincially significant employment zones, and the identification of strategic areas and goods movement corridors in the region where land should be protected to support future jobs, such as along 400 series highways and around the Pearson Airport. Further policies consider flexibility to consider the introduction of non-employment uses around major transit station areas, directing higher density employment uses to strategic growth areas that are supported by transit, and policies that support the protection of future strategic employment areas beyond the planning horizon to support existing and planned transportation infrastructure. Next slide. Staff continue to work closely with our local municipal counterparts and stakeholders to refine and update our technical studies, preliminary findings, and draft policies and directions. Growth management inputs will continue to inform the development and evolution of our policies as inputs to other focus areas, including transportation, SABE, and the forthcoming fiscal impact assessment. Thank you, and we've had a lot of questions, but if there are any additional questions, we're happy to answer.
I don't see any questions. I have one on bullet 4. This council endorsement of draft 2051 municipal growth allocation land needs assessment. Hopefully we'll have lots of financial and infrastructure reports over the next couple of weeks before we come to that conclusion, because I think the costs are very important to all of us. Can someone move, and thank you very much for your presentation. Can someone move receipt? Linda? Anybody opposed? Thank you. And we go to 5.3.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, and welcome.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for hearing our presentation on major transit station areas in support of the December 10th Peel 2041 staff report and draft ROPA. So you'll hear from myself, Joy Sims, and Duran Wedderburn from the Regional Planning and Growth Management Division, as well as Paul Kulig of Perkins & Will and Sean Hurdle, both consultants on the Mtsa study who are available for questions today. This presentation will provide additional information on the purpose of Mtsa planning, the regional approach and study methodology, impacts of draft Mtsa policies and proposed mapping, and next steps. Next slide, please. Major transit station areas, or MTSAs, are lands within a 500 to 800 meter radius of a transit station or stop, located mainly along existing or planned transit corridors. 800 meters is approximately a 10-minute walk. It's important to designate MTSAs in the regional official plan to make sure that jobs, services, and housing are more densely located near transit and are easily accessible. The regional Mtsa study will establish policies to support the development of complete communities in Peel by planning for higher densities and mixed uses in areas along existing or planned transit. Next slide. The Planning Act sets out the legislative framework for establishing protected MTSAs and official plan policies regarding density and implementation planning, as well as regional policy role, and that compared to the local municipal policy role. The growth plan identifies priority transit corridors where MTSAs must be delineated, establishes minimum densities, and criteria for municipalities to propose lower alternative densities. The growth plan also provides a vision for mixed-use, transit-supportive, and pedestrian-oriented MTSAs. The regional official plan will establish a framework to meet these provincial policy requirements and guide implementation planning by local municipalities. Next slide. The land use planning of MTSAs is closely related to transportation planning in developing a connected and efficient regional structure and system. The transportation policy framework is focused on the accommodation of population and employment growth to 2051. The policies are intended to implement a balanced approach of a 50% sustainable mode share, with the highest increase being in transit use. A suite of interventions includes improving first and last mile connections, enhancing transit on regional roads in coordination with rapid transit corridors, and advocating for transit improvement projects. Next slide. In consultation with our local municipal partners in the province, 91 potential MTSAs have been identified to be studied, 36 of which are growth plan priority stations. These include strategic transit corridors and hubs across Peel and emerging corridors. The purpose of the Peel MTSA study was to collaborate with local stakeholders to identify, delineate, classify, and develop policies for these MTSAs that are key to the future of the region. Next slide. As the region is required to set boundaries or delineations for MTSAs, a process was established with our local municipal partners to do so, as outlined here. So while the 800-meter radii are considered at the outset of the process, the delineated boundaries form the basis for policy implementation. The region has also informally engaged the province on this delineation process, and we continue to work with them to balance larger delineations with the local community context and limit intensification opportunities in some areas. Next slide. An important part of the planning work for MTSAs is the establishment of transit-supportive minimum densities. Once minimum densities are established in the regional official plan, the local municipalities will be required to undertake implementation planning to determine the specific land uses, building heights, and if desired, maximum densities to be implemented that also conform with the regional official plan. Many stations already have a local policy framework in place that meets or exceeds the minimum proposed densities, such as in downtown Mississauga and Brampton. The region has worked collaboratively with the local municipalities through the MTSA study to confirm where MTSAs can meet minimum densities through existing or updated policies, or where unique contexts may require lower alternative densities. Next slide. So there are a number of challenges and opportunities in planning for MTSAs in Peel. It's a challenge to align when development in the MTSAs will occur with when infrastructure is available, and many MTSAs overlap with existing low-density residential neighborhoods that would benefit from improved transit access by sustainable travel modes like walking, cycling, and carpooling. The MTSA study and draft ROPA were developed with an eye to addressing the challenges and leveraging opportunities to support Peel's strategic priorities and healthy, complete communities. So in this next section of the presentation, Paul Kulik from Perkins and Will provide an overview of the Peel MTSA study.
Okay, can we please pause? I think Councillor Vincenze has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a good time to ask this question. So when you talk about an MTSA, but you also mentioned corridors. Now with the MTSA, you delineate 800 meters, or that 10-minute walk distance. Do you do that same delineation for a corridor?
So the MTSAs, and thank you, and through Madam Chair, the MTSAs are just the selected stations on a corridor. So those would receive the delineation. So starting from that 800-meter radius for reference, and then actually drawing a specific boundary. So not all corridors have become MTSAs. It's ones that are, one of those higher order transit stations or specific transit hubs.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, so what would the delineation be for those transit corridors where there is higher order transit? How far do you go in terms of your planning? Because every stop is a potential place where a lot of ridership would happen, right?
Absolutely. So on the delineation process slide, I'm not sure if we can kind of go back to slide 6 for a moment. That might help. But you can see there that we look at specific contextual factors on the MTSAs to determine what makes sense. So things like if there's a stream corridor or some obvious natural hazard or something like that, that would obviously kind of draw an edge to the boundary. But we've also respected existing local policy areas. So you can kind of see in this Clarkson example where the rail corridor and there's some existing low density residential on the north, the delineation has actually been cut off. So it all depends on the local context and what's around the MTSA and where growth is appropriate. And then of course, that's for MTSA specifically. And there are other areas in the local municipal plans that receive intensification as well.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, so going forward, can we think about how we would define that delineation along the full length of a transit corridor, or in other words, where there is a higher order transit solution? For example, you listed the Queen Street corridor in Brampton. It would be very useful if we defined, as you have here with the 800 meters, a distance that potentially would be appropriate to guide the planning process. Is that something we can do?
So through you, Madam Chair, we've looked at, I guess Queen's actually a good example. Our draft delineations, we worked closely with local municipal staff and then any existing policy boundaries that are there to respect those. And then those themselves the delineations themselves will make that boundary. And in some areas like Queen or like on the Dundas corridor in Mississauga, you can actually see that the MTSAs do line up right beside each other. So they kind of make a very defined strip already. But it's not in the provincial policy framework to necessarily just draw a line and like a swath straight across a transit corridor. You can kind of start at the transit station or stop location and then draw the appropriate delineation around it.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Innes?
Thank you, Chair. In regards to the comments about local contact. So Caledon's local contact is going to be extremely different when it comes to MTSAs than Brampton and Mississauga. There is no overlapping of existing communities. There is the creation of new communities, which I would hope would be transit-oriented communities so that we can reach that density target that we are trying to fulfill, and to also reach our target of 50% reduction of people on the roads. So I guess I'm looking to make sure that there is a local context given from a Caledon perspective, not just from our urban centers in Brampton and Mississauga, which I don't see at this point. I know that Adrian and I have had this conversation before. And I guess my other question is, because of the local context in Caledon, and I'll give the MTSA in my ward in particular, is that it's an 800-meter radius or a 10-minute walk, but a good, quarter turn on a clock, if you will, of that radius is actually greenbelt. So you can't, we're not developing those lands, obviously, and so what is provided in an opportunity to make sure that we are building complete communities and using the developable land to do that, because some of that land will fall out of that 800-meter radius or a 10-minute walk in Caledon as we're trying to build transit-oriented communities. And I want to make sure that that is part of the discussion and process, because I'm not seeing it in the presentation. I know Adrian and I have had that conversation, but I'm concerned about local context and making sure that there's a differentiation between the local context in Brampton and Mississauga versus in Caledon.
Okay, thank you for that question. Oh, yeah. So through you, Madam Chair, thanks for the question. And I think we do definitely recognize that things are different in Caledon, and in the Bolton example, at the Bolton Go, you know, our initial delineation that we've prepared and you know, worked with local staff to release on the MTSA profiles for Bolton is kind of follows parcel boundaries at this point, because you know, we essentially had to do our best, not knowing at the time whether it was in the settlement boundary or not. And so because it's also was a planned station at the time, you know, we drew what we could, and then we can always be responsive as appropriate, you know, as we consider delineation of that station. To revise the boundary as needed. And we do have stations where, you know, the delineation does go, because it's skewed, as you said, one side of it, say, is undevelopable. If there are developable lands that are appropriate on the other side, you know, we definitely consider that context as to drawing the boundary and seeing where we can actually capitalize on locating the housing, the jobs, the services near the transit stop.
Okay, and I would presume heading down that same, I know we're getting to the classification, I'm going to ask the question quickly. I would presume that the region would be looking at, as example, the Bolton as a primary or a secondary MTSA, so that when the town is doing their official plan process, that we're building and planning for a transit-oriented community, because this is a chicken and egg scenario. Whereas in Brampton and Mississauga, those communities already exist and they're going to be retrofitted and intensified. We're actually building new communities from scratch, and we have an opportunity to make sure that we're actually putting the planning criteria in on the ground to promote public transportation and active transportation. And I just want to make sure that that difference is delineated between Brampton and Mississauga, because I don't want us to have to come back and move it up in its classification. We should be actually planning and building those communities as transport.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Innes. Can we go on to the next section?
Yep, if we can have, yeah, if you move to slide 9, Stephanie. Thank you very much, and I'll let Paul take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you, and through the chair, I'll begin my presentation. The MTSA study that Joy just described was developed in 2 parts. Phase 1A, which is the blue on the left side of your screen, identified over 100 potential MTSAs, which included a number of MTSAs identified by local planning staff in their municipalities. We employed 4 analytical lenses to complete this assessment of the MTSAs. These included mobility, market and growth potential, land use and built form, as well as community services. A stakeholder kickoff session was conducted in June of 2019, and the MTSA process was reviewed, and technical input arrived to deliver buy-in on the study methodology. The potential MTSAs were then analyzed using the 4 analytical lenses. Preliminary delineations for each of the MTSAs were prepared, and profiles for 91 of the MTSAs developed based on the unique existing context. These MTSAs were then categorized into a preliminary classification network, which was then shared as part of the Phase 1A report. Phase 1B, so the image is on the orange on the right of your screen, included additional technical analysis that considered office and market trends, the development capacity, zoning capacity, as well as infrastructure capacity. With that in hand, a updated classification framework and updated MTSA profiles were created, together with policy and planning recommendations that were used to inform the updated ROPA. Next slide, please. The classification framework relies on both a temporal review of MTSA planning, so we're looking at the timing of infrastructure, local planning updates, etc., as well as the individual development potential of MTSAs and their ability to achieve the growth plan minimum densities or alternative densities. Primary stations are MTSAs that are delineated with a boundary and mapped in the regional official plan. They have existing or planned transit supportive build forms and can meet or exceed the minimum density targets identified in the growth plan. Secondary stations will also be delineated in the regional official plan, but are constrained by a variety of existing land use patterns, built forms, and may require an alternative density target. These stations may take on commuter station function with a mix of uses that support increased transit ridership. Lastly, the planned stations will be identified in the regional official plan and are intended to become major transit station areas, but are not delineated due to the need for infrastructure planning and investment and/or updates to the land use changes to unlock their potential. Next slide, please. A summary of the analysis has been prepared and organized by MTSA and included in the 91 MTSA profiles. And you can see the one on the right from Mount Pleasant GO Station. These summaries include a summary of density calculations, summary of the capacity analysis, so that's the development, zoning, and infrastructure, together with color-coded circles for low, medium, and high potential. The development capacity looked at the density that could be accommodated in each of the MTSAs based on different variety of built forms. The zoning capacity analysis looked at the existing zoning bylaws for the cities of Mississauga and Brampton, as well as the town of Caledon, to determine if the current zoning in those areas supported the planned densities. The infrastructure capacity cost analyzes the current water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure against the growth plan priority corridors to determine the costs of undertaking utility upgrades to meet the minimum density targets. Updated boundary delineations were also included, so it's the bright yellow highlighted area you see on your screen, as well as the planning and policy recommendations specific to that MTSA were included. And so with that, I'll pass the presentation back to Duran to provide an overview on the draft MTSA ROPA, as well as some of the next steps. Thank you.
I have no questions, so we'll go to the section.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Paul. So based on the next slide, please. Perfect. So based on our work with the local municipalities, our consultant, the stakeholders like Metrolinx and MTO, and the public, we've received feedback that highlighted some key considerations for our work. What we've heard is, MTSAs are opportunities to attract office development and improve active transportation connections. And where stations may have limited development potential, they could still serve as a commuter or a community hub station. So some of these highlights have been carried forward in our study and draft policies, and we are continuing our engagement through the draft ROPA with our stakeholders to get additional input. Next slide. So the MTSA policy framework is intended to guide the development of healthy transit-oriented communities, and our framework recognizes, and to some of the points earlier, that each station really does have a unique context to achieve the transit-supported development objectives based on the corresponding land use areas and some of the natural features and attributes. Sufficient intensification opportunities do exist throughout the region, and all stations are not required to meet the minimum densities within the planning horizon. Stations that are not ready to be delineated and identified as planned need to be protected for future transit-oriented development. And employment areas within and adjacent to MTSAs need to be carefully planned to protect the viability of the surrounding industry and employment areas. Next slide. So each MTSA has been given a station classification as described earlier through Schedule Y7 of the draft ROPA. The classification supports the form and function in the regional context. This includes considerations for areas better suited for gentle intensification due to natural and physical constraints, as well as the continued protection for employment areas as mentioned previously. In addition, we are working to leverage opportunities to secure affordable housing units. Planned stations, like those along the Milton corridor, do require a little bit more municipal study, and others which already meet the minimum densities can do so with limited change or a little bit more detailed implementation planning. Next slide. The draft MTSA ROPA provides the region with the flexibility to guide planning for the various stations across the region and their unique contexts. Regional policies on delineations and minimum densities in the regional plan are sheltered from appeal if they are delineated. Once the draft ROPA is adopted by Regional Council and approved by the province, the local municipalities would have 1 year to bring forward the implementation planning work for the delineated stations. We are pleased with the framework that has been developed, but we will be considering and making adjustments based on feedback from stakeholders and further consultation with the province. Next slide. As we continue to engage on the draft MTSA ROPA and make further requirements as required, we look forward to formally circulating the draft MTSA ROPA with the province to receive official feedback. Advancement of our draft work is an important milestone and provides direction to the local municipalities in commencing the preparation of their detailed planning studies and some of the supporting implementation work to be undertaken. Once we've received feedback from our stakeholders, we look forward to bringing the draft MTSA ROPA back before this committee. Thank you and welcome any questions that you may have.
I don't see any questions. We're moving along. Next, we've got to have someone move receipt of this last presentation. Mayor Thompson? No objections? We'll move to 5.4.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Catherine Dewar. I'm a principal planner with the Regional Planning and Growth Management Division and project managing the Settlement Area Boundary Extension Study, which you'll hear mostly referred to as SABE. I'll be giving an overall update on the progress of this work, and we also have with us on the line Stefan from Hempson Consulting, who has been helping the region with this work. He will speak to the various technical components that have informed the SABE work to date. We look forward to your feedback and responding to any questions after the presentation. Next slide, please. So the SABE is one focus area under the PL 2041 Plus program and is one piece of the broader growth management work that was mentioned earlier by Duran. Provincial plans require the region to determine the appropriate locations for additional community areas, which include residential and employment lands, which the SABE study was initiated to do. The locations are to be informed by 12 evidence-based technical studies that have been undertaken as part of this work. As mentioned earlier, the growth plan directs how we plan for SABE and also to accommodate growth to 2051. Next slide, please. So the SABE study is being undertaken in 4 phases, which are summarized here. Phase A provided background on the SABE process and identified the initial study area and then the focus study area, which is the area that serves as the basis for the technical studies. Phase B was focused on developing the technical studies, including related public consultation. Phase C is where we are currently, and through this phase, we have proposed a draft conceptual SABE area and justification report based on the technical studies results. As part of this phase, we are also developing policies and conducting further detailed studies that will be used to refine the SABE concept mapping. Phase D will provide the final SABE recommendations as well as an associated regional official plan amendment. I'll now turn it over to Stefan to walk us through the technical studies and how we have arrived at the latest draft SABE concept map released at the December 10th Regional Council. Next slide, please.
Well, thank you, Catherine. Through you, Madam Chair, you can see from this map how the process of narrowing down the SABE area has been done. The initial study area was that agricultural and rural area in the southern part of Caledon, the so-called White Belt area, south of the protected Green Belt, and where the town's two largest urban settlements, Bolton and Mayfield West, are already located. And it was within this area that the focus study area that Catherine just mentioned was developed based on a number of planning criteria and environmental criteria, workshops and consultations, including consultations with Caledon staff. The FSA is shown in pink on this map. It's quite large. It's about 8,000 hectares altogether, and it covers most of the White Belt. If you look in the right-hand corner of this map, you'll see a blue box. That represents the approximate land requirement for the SABE to 2041. So that's essentially what we were working with before the growth plan amendment was passed last August that extended the time frame to 2051. You can see also that the FSA is somewhat framed by significant natural features that extend down from the Greenbelt down into the urban areas, and the GTA West Highway Corridor as well, which is a significant piece of infrastructure, of course. Preliminary estimates assume that that blue box is probably about 3 times larger than it was now that we're planning to 2051. It's about 4,300 hectares, if you remember, Russell, from earlier. That's, of course, a significant jump in land area, and it arises principally because of that growth spike that occurs in Caledon around about the early 2040s that Duran and Russell spoke to in the earlier slide deck. So it was the FSA that was used as the basis for the technical studies that Catherine just referred to. And that work was really aimed at determining the feasibility of the lands in this part of the world for urban expansion and the most appropriate locations for that expansion. The next slide, please. This slide just summarizes the technical studies that were done. They were undertaken by experts in their technical fields. They were presented at numerous consultations with the local municipalities, with other public agencies and the public, and that consultation wrapped up in the fall. The studies were organized under 4 themes. So the first covered the natural environment, including the physical features, climate and the impact of climate change, and the state of agriculture in the FSA. The second theme addressed the resources in the FSA, both the natural resources and the cultural and archaeological heritage that's in the area. The third theme dealt with hard infrastructure requirements, so the water, the wastewater, and transportation infrastructure, as well as the associated fiscal impacts. And finally, the growth management and built environment theme looked at the spatial arrangement of community lands, principally through the perspective of community health and public facility needs, as well as the spatial arrangements of land for commercial and employment uses. Most of the studies are complete, though there's some additional work on some of the studies, principally the infrastructure studies and the fiscal impact work that's being undertaken right now. Next slide, please. So the results of the studies and the feedback we got from the consultation in the fall led to this concept map, which was released as part of your December 10th council package, and which summarizes essentially the most appropriate location for new urban lands based on the technical analysis. This map has been updated since December 10th to reflect the changes arising from the ROPA 30 and ROPA 34 approvals that were discussed earlier, as well as the final alignment of the GTA West Highway Corridor. And the concept map distinguishes the new employment areas in blue and the new community areas in red. The employment areas are configured so that they easily access the highway, so that they build on existing employment areas, for example, around Tullamore, as well as employment opportunities, for example, the Brampton-Callan Airport, so that they're close to the existing labor supply, both in Mayfield West and Bolton and in Brampton itself, and that they take advantage of suitable topography, particularly opportunities for large lots and flat lands, as well as other very important criteria, including transportation criteria, which I know has come up a lot this afternoon. You'll see that expansion into the Sandhill area, north of the highway, is considered to be, at this point, a little premature when we look at the 2051 time horizon. But there are steps the region can take to prepare for that area's transition into an employment area through the regional official plan, and policies are being developed to that end as we speak. The community areas in red are focused around housing and residential land needs, and build on the existing Bolton and Mayfield West communities. That is the driving thinking behind the location of those lands. Generally, there's been an avoidance of any expansion north of the highway, in part to minimize the infrastructure investment that might be required to bring pipes across the highway. And you'll see that there are two areas south of the highway and northeast of Mayfield West, and also in those two areas of land that extend up into the green belt just north of Bolton, the so-called Bolton Fingers, which do not form part of the community area or the new employment area. Those have been left out of the SABE, principally because those areas provide the best opportunity for the region to preserve agricultural activity in the FSA. And so, depending, of course, on regional council's priorities, those have been left out for now to highlight that those are the areas where there are the best opportunities for long-term continued agricultural uses. Next slide. And back to you, Catherine. Thank you.
Question from Mayor Thompson?
Yeah, first of all, I got to tell you, I've gone through your Appendix 4. Well done. It's very helpful. And I think this is something that's a tool that we all can use. Some of the things you've done, you've gone through quite well, and you've explained the timelines. Thank you for that. The other thing, too, is the acknowledgement. One thing that wasn't, I noticed in your report, is the Zone 7 water system. And in order to use the Zone 6, especially down in the Wildfield area, we'll definitely need to have that Zone 7 water system still incorporated, because we've got to take Bolton off that in order to run the Wildfield projects. So I'm just saying those are some of the things technically we can figure out going forward. One more thing I want to add, two things I want to ask you. The one thing, the Sandhill area is already, we got the sewer running up there. We do have the water right there. The question is, that is one area that I think we need to look at as a business park, because with the future growth, especially with people coming out of Caledon East, as well as the north end of Bolton, that's just another opportunity to grow. And we got infrastructure already in place there. That was just one thing. I'm glad you acknowledge there's still something we can still look at, but that is just the one thing where I'm emphasizing back. I need to grow the employment tax base. The other thing is, if we can go back to the previous map that you had there, which showed the green belt and everything, if we could, please.
Slide 6.
There we go. Thank you. This is where one thing we've been asking, and now because the Places to Grow legislation, this is what Brampton did in 2000. Looking at that white belt area, we should make that a hard urban boundary. That way, we're on the same level playing field as Brampton and Mississauga when it comes to planning. And that's just something, can we please look at that? Because I think this is something that will simplify. You heard Councillor Innes speak earlier, but I really think at this point, with the growth that we're taking, we need to develop that hard urban boundary. And to me, that white belt is a really good hard urban boundary for future growth anyway. And I'm just wondering if we could look at that. And could I have your opinion on that, please?
I may ask Stefan if you have some thoughts.
Yeah, certainly. Through you, Madam Chair.
Sorry, Kevin.
And I may be a little uncertain, Mr. Mayor, as what you mean by a hard urban boundary. Certainly, the Greenbelt boundary itself is essentially a hard urban boundary.
Correct.
In that there's very little opportunity to expand settlement areas anywhere in the Greenbelt.
Correct.
And there are limitations on your ability to create an urban boundary around those white belt lands and designate them for urban uses if they're not needed before 2051. And so that's sort of where we have this issue with Sandhill, is that I think that everyone, certainly the technical work that was done, identified Sandhill as an area with employment land potential. It's just a question of the timing of when it might be needed. And so I think there are difficulties under the growth plan with giving that the sort of status that you would give some of the other employment lands, simply because of the amount of jobs that are going to be allocated to Caledon. So there may be other policy mechanisms to sort of tip your hat, so to speak, to that area and begin the transition of that to employment area without actually formally designating it. And I think the same would apply to those white belt lands as well.
Yeah, no, and the reason is because we got to do boundary expansions. It's several steps in a process that comes back to the region, and obviously we've had already a couple of hiccups. And I'm not faulting anybody from Brampton, Mississauga that doesn't understand the complex process. All I'm trying to do is level the playing field. Brampton, up till now, hadn't been able to fill in their whole white boundary yet till now. And similar to what Mississauga did in the past. So that I know it's no longer, we can decide that at the municipal level, and that's why we've had municipal affairs to look at it. But I appreciate your opinion on that. One more thing I want to ask you, and I know we're really tight on time, but the one thing that we need to address, and this is a tough one because we can't do it in the Greenbelt, is the underground economy. And I'm thinking for Carolyn too, right? Is cemeteries. We need future cemetery. That's something that we have to deal with that's not dealt with. And that is something that we have to look at because if we're taking on all of this population, we need an end game here as well. But I think that's something that keeps getting left out. And if that's something that we can leave in at this point in time, I know I got a ton of questions, but we're really tight on time. We can catch it. We'll have time to catch up on all my other questions. So thank you very much for your report, and it's very good. Thank you.
One of the reasons we decided to have this committee is so we can take the time to ask all the questions you need. I'm not sure. I think we were supposed to be finished at 3:30, but I don't mind going till 4 or as long as the staff's okay.
That's
permitted. I'm just trying to be respectful of the time, Carolyn. And
but you weren't respectful talking about cemeteries and me in the same breath, young man.
I was just making sure you're paying attention.
I was. And I'll remember. Okay. Councillor Sinclair, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, please. Perhaps at some point we could have a discussion of a clear role of Peel and then lower tier planning principles for urban design and decision making. And I noticed that slide 5.47, there's talking about community and neighborhood planning and getting into site plans. I would have thought that's Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon's area. So I think we need a discussion of where the field breaks off in terms of principles and activity. Thank you.
That might be something we'll add to the March meeting, and we'll go back to you, Alan.
One more thing is on the employment lands, you've had a really good, especially in your Appendix 4, but there's one challenge that we have, what I call it the good, the bad, and the ugly, is contractor yards is a reality. And I think that is something when we're talking about different styles of employment, the freight villages, the enterprise zones, and different things. The one thing is, I've got trucks parked on every farm that is not being farmed today. We've got illegal trucking all over. Brampton has the same problem. The neighboring areas are. We have to, I think we need to specify and identify a need of where when 40% of the trucking firms are based in Peel, we got to find a home and a place for these guys. And that's large open spaces where we can't get taxed, but we need to identify it so we can develop a place to put these guys. Because I can beat them up in court, but the JP feels sorry for them because they have no place to go. So I think we have to figure out, and we need your help and guidance, and this is where I'm pushing back to you, Catherine. You're very well aware of goods movement. We have to figure out what is a contractor's yard and where is a place for truck depots, which is just big parking areas for trucks. We got to figure out how to make that fit. We're into the planning. Let's get that figured out too. And that's just something that hasn't been touched on, but it's a necessary evil that we have to kind of figure out how we manage that. So that's some homework I'm sending back to you guys. Thank you.
Okay, and we are.
I believe there are a couple more slides, Catherine.
Yeah, just a couple.
Okay, thank you.
If you can go back to slide 7, please. Yeah, so this is just the overview of the existing and proposed water, wastewater infrastructure, just overlaid with the conceptual SABE employment in community areas. This is something that's informing the more detailed work going forward. So we'll be using this in the wastewater, water in detailed infrastructure analysis, as well as the fiscal impact work that will be coming forward in the next few months. Next slide, please. So just on the policy directions, I'll just go through this very quickly, but through the technical studies, a number of key policy areas emerged that we wanted to highlight and will be addressed in the ROPA coming forward. Policies around robust protection of natural heritage and water resource management systems to enhance, maintain natural environment. Policies will be included to stage and sequence development in a way that makes efficient and best use of infrastructure and preserve financial well-being. Additionally, a series of policies will be embedded that set the framework for community and neighborhood planning to be detailed, thorough, well-coordinated to ensure complete, healthy, sustainable communities, and then providing that direction to the local level to develop long-term transit, active transportation needs, protecting cultural, archaeological resources, energy and emissions reduction, strong communities, employment, and strong neighborhood centers, and directing employment areas to multiple modes of transportation. Next slide, please. So the next steps for this work are the further detailed technical analyses that will be undertaken for infrastructure modeling and for the conceptual SABE areas, detailed agricultural impact assessments of the conceptual SABE areas, and fiscal impact analysis, including testing of different intensification rates and housing densities. These more detailed technical analyses, plus the comments that we've received, will help us with policy development and to further refine the SABE mapping. And the overall PL 2041 plus timelines were discussed earlier by Adrian and Tara, but again, the draft ROPA planned for this summer and final ROPA by the end of this year. So we're happy to take any additional questions or comments the committee may have.
I don't see any questions. Councillor Sinclair, will you move receipt of that report?
Not a member. Sorry.
Oh, I forgot. You're so active. Lynn, would you move it? Paul's moving it. Paul's good. Thumb up. Thank you. Any objections?
Sorry, Chair.
I just wanted to let you know, I don't have slide 7. I knew as soon as it went up on the screen, I didn't have it. So if someone could remember to send it to me tomorrow, I'd appreciate that.
None of us have that. I think it would, and that's the wastewater one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't in the report. No, we need that.
Sorry, that was added after. Yep.
Yeah, clerks will provide it to the committee members.
Thank you.
You were paying attention. Okay, now we move on to 5.5.
Correct. So there is a recommendation. So there is a recommendation on the report. This was the report referred from the December 10th meeting. So I will read the motion as it's presented, that the next steps outlined in the report of the Interim Commissioner of Public Works and Interim Chief Planner and Director of Regional Planning and Growth Management, titled PL 2041 Plus Official Plan Review and Municipal Comprehensive Review Update be endorsed. And further, should the PL 2041 Municipal Comprehensive Review Draft Regional Official Plan Amendment Statutory Consultations be delayed beyond spring 2021, that staff be authorized to undertake statutory consultation for the proposed major transit station area amendment as a separate regional official plan amendment based on the policies and mapping included in the subject report, incorporating stakeholder feedback as appropriate, and further that a copy of the subject report be forwarded to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, City of Brampton, the Town of Caledon, City of Mississauga, conservation authorities, other municipalities adjacent to the region of Peel, and to the appropriate agencies. So if there are any objections or questions?
I just want to make sure everybody's clear that this is changed from receipt, which we did at council, to approve. Alan?
Yes, I just need I'm just asking for clarification if I can, please. Yep. We're just talking strictly on this environmental thing to be delayed, but we're not slowing up the rest of the official plan timelines, right? This is just this one specific issue that we're asking about?
That's how I interpret it. How is everybody
I'm just making sure.
The correct interpretation? Adrian?
Yeah, that's right. Essentially, this resolution just allows us to continue on with the process, with the engagement, and coming back to council, and in particular advancing the MTSA work. So it's keeping everything moving. Exactly.
Okay.
And it's council, and council will have the final word on approving it.
Yep.
Okay, Councillor Starr, would you like to move that motion? Anybody object? Very good. Now we're at 5.6, or we don't have to go through all these other pages, do we? Nope, good. Okay, we'll move to 5.6.
Currently, there are no speakers to this item.
Okay. I just got to find myself here. And this is a recommendation as well. Would you like to read that out?
Correct. Okay. So the staff, item 5.6, the recommendation reads that the staff comments on the proposed implementation amendments to the Planning Act that provides the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing enhanced authority to address certain matters as part of a minister's zoning order as outlined in the report of the Interim Commissioner of Public Works, titled Response to Provincial Consultation on Minister Zoning Orders be endorsed, and further that a copy of the subject report be forwarded to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the City of Brampton, the Town of Caledon, and the City of Mississauga. There are no speakers. We can't hear you, Councillor Parrish.
Are there any speakers on this subject?
No, not currently.
Okay, and who would like to move it for me? Martin? Anybody object? Okay, we did get a little bogged down, but you know what? That's the purpose of the committee, so everybody understands it thoroughly. And when we're all asked questions at the regular council meeting, we can all answer them. Won't that just be wonderful? Thank you very much, everybody. Would someone like to move adjournment? Councillor Vincent. I'm going to get your name right. I was pronouncing it like Nando, and that's not how it's pronounced. Can you tell me?
It's simply Vicente.
Vicente. Councillor Vicente, would you move adjournment?
I shall, yes.
All those in favor? Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Councillor Sinclair. You've done a very good job of participating. You tricked me into thinking you're a member. Thank you, everybody.